Welcome to the Greater Montana Foundation Legacy Project, preserving the history of Montana broadcasting and the pioneers of communication whose vision and foresight brought together the people of Montana.
Hello everybody, I'm Bill Schwanke, and sitting to my left here is Gene Peterson, who just found out that he is the 2015 inductee into the Montana Broadcasters Association. Gene and I go back a long, long ways. Gene hired me, gave me my first job in radio back in the late 60s. Hired me to be the voice of the Grizzlies, and I've been forever thankful for that. And oddly enough, or ironically enough, I just fully retired from sports announcing about a week and a half ago. So Gene, thank you for all you've done for me and for so many people in this business. But let's have a history lesson here. How did this happen for you? Where did it all start?
Well, I was raised in Culbertson, Montana, on a good Saturday night after harvest, pushing 1,000 people. And I was planning on being a coach and a teacher because my mother was a school teacher. My oldest brother was a school teacher, administrator, and coach. But then I went to career day at Sydney, and Claire Kresbach of KGCX was there. And he said, we're looking for the next Wolfman Jack in America, and you should do that. So I said, yeah, I think I'll do that. So I sent the tape off to Brown Institute, Minneapolis, and I and every other applicant were accepted, and they thought we were going to be stars. So I showed up with my $19 every Monday morning and was there for about a year and a half. And my first job then was at KFBB Radio Television in Great Falls, and Bud Blanchett hired me.
And was that, you stayed your whole career in Montana then?
In Montana. I started in January of '61 and was the nighttime jock. There were 4 of us, 2 of the great, big, traditional, booming voices, a guy named Bob Nelson, and the program director was Howard McDonald. Saying good morning was a 6-syllable word for them, and then they had 2 newbies with the little chipmunk voices, and I would run 6 until midnight for the first month. And then they found out that I had a first-class license. At the time, of course, all the stations in Montana either were daytime, they would go off at sunset, they would go directional, they would reduce their power, or something happened. And at that time, you had to have a first-class engineer on duty to record all of the transmitter readings. When they found out that I had a first phone, that meant that I could go from $80 a week to a morning shift and get $90 a week, and for that $10, they eliminated an engineer on TV and a switcher, and I would come in and would, during the morning network, would turn on the TV transmitter, warm it up, load the film chain, put the test pattern on, and so at 8 o'clock somebody else could come in, and so for that $10, they saved a lot of money, and I'd had my first lesson in the economics of broadcasting.
When you went to Brown Institute, was getting the first-class license part of the curriculum, or was that a choice?
No, that was an option that they were starting to offer when they found out, when broadcasters were deciding that it was a lot cheaper to have one person with a license. So my announcing curriculum was actually 33 weeks. 2 choices with first-class engineering. One was 26, which I took, which gave you about 20 weeks of theory and then 6 weeks of memorization. The other guys just took the 6 weeks of memorization, and they would go take the FCC test. There were about 3 tests, and every time you came back from taking the test, the instructors would say, any question we didn't have? What were the answers? Because they were just giving us all of the answers, all of the questions. So when I went in to take my test, you could have given me 1 word out of a question, 1 answer, and I could have filled in everything else. I was that well prepared, but that was what they were doing at the time. With first-class engineers. It enabled them to do a lot more placement. It was easier to get a job.
So when you came out of school, I assume that all you were thinking about was being an announcer.
Yes.
Because
a rock and roll DJ.
Exactly. And later on you became management, owner, all of that stuff. Was that even in the back of your mind back then?
Not at all.
Yeah.
No.
So let's go through the progression. You started in Great Falls with KFBB, and then kind of take us through the years.
At Great Falls, was an announcer, and then came here to Missoula with Dale Moore, and at that time was part of Phil Hess's first broadcast class. In 63 or 64, we just had the 50th anniversary. And so at that time, I roomed with one of the instructors, Ray Dilley, Don Kinney, who was a great broadcaster and friend, Bob Ranstrom, and a lot of those guys who were in class at the time have remained good friends.
And then in terms of the management side of things, when did it strike you that this might be a direction for you to go, and even into sales? For
didn't have any idea. I was doing nighttime announcing, and then I took on public service, and then I took on music, and then pretty soon I was program director. And then I was program director. I was starting to do logs and traffic, and start servicing accounts and doing remote broadcasts. And then I was station manager. And then as I was station manager, I started doing more selling, and then evolved into the station manager.
So it was more other people recognizing your abilities and moving
yeah,
into
there were
these things?
Broadcasting does have some people who may not have as much ambition. They'll take the pizza and the free movie passes, but really don't want to work. And so that's one of the things that I would advise is how do you become successful? You do things others can't do or don't want to do, and you just start doing it, and then pretty quick you are one.
So talk about the early years and maybe some of the things that happened either that encouraged you to keep going and made you think you did a good thing by going to Brown, and maybe a couple of things that had you wondering.
No, I think it's interesting in that I never thought of broadcasting, and particularly ownership, as a way to make money. As a business. I thought you had the license, and it was drummed into our little heads that this is a privilege and you serve the community. And so I was a service provider. And if you do that well enough, if you entertain and if you inform and if you work in the community, then hopefully some recognition and some financial rewards will follow that. And that's what I think happened.
Well, I was working for Scotty Broadcasting.
Yes.
The old trailer house out by the cemetery here in Missoula, I don't know, 100 watts at night or whatever it was, 75. And you came into the picture kind of during those years for me when you came into the company with Bill Holter, and
Yes.
then you ended up owning KYLT and whatever other stations were with it at the time. It's a whole different thing, of course, today with the
Yeah,
ownership.
what happened is that Bill Holter moved the station, was an owner in Glasgow, and he moved the station from out of the trailer house, bought it, where you DJs, I think, would take on a shift, and you would be there until the next guy relieved you, and if you wanted to get paid, you went out and sold an ad to somebody, and you put the money in your pocket. Well, he elevated that and brought in a manager and sold him a 1/12, 1/8, 12.5% interest. And that's how I came in. I gave him my life savings of $1,500, and I assumed a note that he had with a bank in Helena for $11,000. So that together was $12,500, and I became the managing partner of the radio station.
So once you took over, what did you see? I mean, what hit you that needed to be done immediately, and what steps did you take?
The first thing that happened is I opened the bottom desk drawer, and it was full of bar receipts. And I found out that the salespeople had sales meetings at 4 o'clock at the bar every day, and they signed the tabs. So I immediately decided I could do without those salesmen. And the first year, I did all the selling myself. And I would bring the orders home, and my wife would, on the kitchen table after she put the two daughters to bed, would do our bookkeeping. And we had a milestone when we could pay the staff all on the 1st and 15th, because other than that, we didn't have enough money coming in. So we would pay somebody on every other Friday, somebody on every other Wednesday, somebody on the 1st, somebody on the 15th. And so when we finally were able to get everybody on the 1st and 15th, that was major for us.
Well, and I have to point out, too, that before I went to work for Gene, I actually worked part-time for the radio station. And I remember one time going to the bookstore. I was going to school at the UM. And I went to the bookstore to buy some books, and they had a list of businesses up on the back that do not take checks from these businesses. Yes. And KYLT was on on the board, and I thought, uh-oh, so I went and borrowed the money from my dad. And
that was that was before. That was
Yes.
before Holter.
So I knew you had work to do
And
there.
and then, but it was a real. I think you would call it the mama papa story. The girls, when they were in grade school, started doing voicing commercials, and I wanted to go 24 hours a day, but we didn't have the revenue, the money for that. So we gathered a group of university students called Hess's Heroes, and they volunteered. I said, if you want to come out, I'll let you play our music, but you can get the experience between midnight and 6, and as soon as we get the money, I'll hire you on. And that worked out extremely well. Fat Dad Lee Curtis was one of the first, and several of our staff announcers who had great careers in broadcasting started under that program. It was only 3 or 4 months, and they were able to get a paycheck, and we were off and away. But that's the type of struggle, I guess. Just go out and open the door every day and make some calls 6 days a week, and on Sunday go and do the bookwork.
Well, for a refresher, too, for the people that don't recognize the name Lee Curtis, but Fat Dad, of course, was the longtime PA voice for University of Montana basketball.
Yes.
And that's where he probably made more fame than he did being on the radio station, although he did quite well there, too.
Right.
So when did the whole, I guess, movement toward growing and more management and that type of thing, how did that all come about?
Well,
As much as you can tell.
I guess I was ambitious. I kept pushing Bill Holter for expansion. I had dreams of a statewide. Well, let me back up, I guess. When I was with KGVO, when I first came over with Dale Moore, Dale Moore came into the state, bought KBMN in Bozeman, Helena, and Missoula. And then he wanted to be governor. And so we brought in a speechwriter. And he had plans to buy former Intermountain stations in Great Falls, Butte, and Billings. And it was a really exciting time because the sales staff were all geared to go out and take management positions in those. When Dale went to make the sale, the FCC stepped in and said, you have an overlapping pattern between Great Falls and Helena. You're going to have to dissolve one of those. It was a tax situation. They weren't able to hang on for that. And so instead of having 6 stations in the state and being a governor, Dale then moved into television, and that was something that happened there. So in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about this Montana station instead of having 2 or 3, 4 stations in a 50,000 market. What happens if you had one similar program covering the entire state of 1 million people? You'd be a major player. So that was always a dream that I have that was never able to be fulfilled.
At least not in the radio market.
Not with me. That happened, though, after the deregulation and the consolidation started, and I met this nice guy named Chris Devine who said, I'm going to buy 100 radio stations in the next 2 years. Well, he ended up buying 200, and 20 of those were in Montana. And so that was interesting and quite a ride.
My main involvement with you, of course, came about with doing Grizzly Sports.
Yes.
I've never asked you this question before. How important was that to the growth of your operation? I know a lot of it was kind of considered public service because it didn't make a lot of money at first, but how important was that to your image and
I
all
think
that?
We were really a rock and roll radio station, and for the first few years, it took some of the older businesses, the banks and the furniture stores and the car dealers were a little reluctant to try and attract the university crowd. And so having Grizzly Sports was really important with that. And before I forget it, I will tell you that Don Reed, after winning the championship, said that he felt having Grizzly Sports, as we developed it to over 20 stations in the state, was one of the important advantages he had in recruiting in the state because every player was able to hear the games. And so you should take credit for a couple of national championships.
Well, I will if you will.
Okay.
Let's talk about your view of broadcasting and radio broadcasting in particular, because I know you've done some sales or at least consulting with television as well.
Yes.
In the later part of your career. But the changes, maybe some of the less obvious changes. I mean, digital and all of that stuff is pretty obvious.
Well, I guess if you go back, there are two things have happened in broadcasting that have been immense. One is technology, and the second is deregulation or regulation. So starting originally with radio and television, we had logs, and you had to have an operator sign on every hour, sign off. You had to have certain levels of programming, a certain percentage of religious programming, educational programming. You had to guarantee an amount of public service to run, and you had to gather up all of those comments. And every 3 years, it was a major project to be able to do that. And television was the same. When we were able to then start getting into technology, originally everything was live. So when I was doing my rock and roll show, I had little 3-inch reels, and I would have elephant stampedes and barking dogs and machine guns and rim shots and everything like that. And I'm having these two little recorders, and I'm taking tapes off, and every record at the time was less than 2 minutes, and so it was quite a workout. Well, the TV guys were doing the same thing. Everything was live. Thursday night they'd bring out steaks, and we'd get the steaks, and I had a little deal to cook the steaks at a drive-in later, but there wasn't any videotape, so everything's filmed, and you had to break down all the film, and it was just so much more labor-intensive. When a cartridge came in, and we could start playing commercials, that was really an advancement. But then, of course, when deregulation hit, and instead of having 7 maximum television stations anywhere in the country, 7 FM, 7 AM. You could have as many as you wanted. Then everything changed, and I guess I would explain radio as, in the early days, it was a hobby. The stations were owned by people who built the sets, and they wanted a radio station because they could fix more radios and sell more radios. And then when my group came in, it was more about programming. And how we were going to program and how we were entertaining. And then the next phase came in with deregulation, and that's when the business people came in and the suits, and they decided we can make money with broadcasting, and so you've had kind of 3 phases.
A couple of ironies that strike me too is that back then everything was live. Now almost nothing is live, on radio, pretty much nothing. But what is live is sports. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's some other things too, but it's just gone full circle. What about some of the things you could talk about maybe that you don't like about the business, or you didn't like about the business while you were heavily involved in it? What scared you or disturbed you or whatever?
No, I really have enjoyed every day that I've been in the business, because you can control it. I mean, there are things that you can make excuses about. You can rationalize that there are too many stations and somebody's cutting rates and they're doing all of that. But you can't control what anybody else is doing. You control your own attitude, you run your own station, and you provide something. Today, it's very difficult. Should you get into broadcasting? Well, yes, because you can still entertain people, you can still inform people, but you have to do it in a different way. And I don't have the advice for that, because I'm not sure exactly how you would do it. But I think in using social media to be able to involve your listeners, that would be a great tool to be able to play a record and get that immediate feedback and reaction to the listener, and doing that back and forth.
You know, I think one of the things that strikes me about Gene Peterson, and one of the reasons he's a legacy in broadcasting, is because he's been such a tremendous mentor to people. And I don't know if that was intentional on his part or unintentional, Gene, but I mean, I know from my standpoint how much I learned from you. I didn't turn into a very good salesman, so maybe I was your only or biggest failure in that regard. But was that part of what you tried to do? Did you feel an obligation or a sense of
well, you hope so. That was the coaching that I would have done. That you want everyone to feel good about themselves. And in order for them to do that, they have to feel they're growing and accomplishing as an individual. But the other part of that, I guess, is that I wanted to be an example by community service. And sometimes that got a little out of control. I was the president of the Chamber of Commerce in about 80. And our manager left. And it was a legislative year coming up, so we decided that it would distract from what we were doing with the legislature and lobbying if we hired a director. So I then had to become the executive secretary and the chamber manager. And at that same time, I was scheduled to be the president of the Montana Broadcasters the next year. And the current president resigned and left. So then I ended up being the president of the Montana Broadcasters a year and a half. And so we dovetailed all of those. And it was an important legislative year for the chamber, for the broadcasters, and I was involved in all of that. But it was a nice perk because at the time the Missoula Chamber hosted a joint legislative dinner the night before the session opened. Mm-hmm. So the kid from Culbertson with the governor is here, and I was the only speaker, and I was the keynote, and that was a very, very special moment to be able to address all of the legislators in Montana at that time. So how can I do that? Because Bill Schwanke was doing my sports, Kerry Nicolai was running the office, national sales, Vern Argo was program director, Peter Christian, Lee Curtis, Fat Dad, and I had an incredible staff of really capable people.
Well, it was a joy working for you, Gene, but let me ask you about the change from being the owner of the radio stations and then moving into an affiliation with Clear Channel, mm-hmm. for example. Was that a bump in the road for you, or is that maybe when you started thinking?
Well, you I think always would like to run the show. But I will say with Clear Channel that the major corporations get a lot of bad-mouthing. Mm-hmm. Clear Channel was wonderful, mainly because I've talked to others, and we were in the bottom 500 of 1,200 radio stations, which meant that as long as we didn't create any problems, everything was fine. And we didn't, so they gave us good benefits, they gave us great equipment, and so it was easy to work for them. But I've always felt, too, that you can't be a good boss unless you're a good employee.
Mm-hmm. I just remember, I've been in it long enough like you have, that there was a period of time when I was working part-time in college that I got more benefit from trade-outs on the radio station. I could go get a haircut, I could get breakfast at somebody's restaurant or whatever, but the paycheck wasn't very big. And so to me, that was a big deal.
That's
you
right.
talked about the transition into being able to pay these people that are working overnight, and it just kind of took off from there.
Yeah, that's, I think it's a tool that's available. If you can, I think that probably would be my biggest disappointment in broadcasting, is that we weren't able to provide as much for my employees as I would have liked, and that's why I eventually sold, because with FM coming on at the time, that was going to take a lot of investment in facility and space and money, all of the things, and I didn't have it. I couldn't compete, and so we found a buyer with an opportunity that was wonderful for me. But I think more important and a major factor in that is that he was able to come in, we thought, and provide something beneficial for the staff and facilities for the community.
So, small town kid from Culbertson, Montana, got some advice from a guy in Sydney, went to school, got into broadcasting. If somebody came up to you today and said, I'm thinking about broadcasting, what kind of advice would you give that person in terms to what to look out for and what to be ready for?
Yeah, I think I would give the same advice whether it was for broadcasting or anything else. I think personal attitude is really important. So it's important to have friends. And you live by the golden rule. You treat everybody the way you'd like to be treated, number one. The next would be to be happy, and that's the Bobby Knight, be disciplined. Do what you have to do. Do it right now. Do it to the best of your ability, and do it that way every time. And if you feel that you are growing and you've accomplished and you feel good about what you've done for the day, you'll feel good. And the last is being successful, and that's doing what other people won't do or don't want to do. You just pick it up, and whether it's a fry cook at a fast food, if you're the guy who in the off time is straightening up the cups and sweeping the floor, before long you're going to be running the place. And so enjoy it, but being an entertainer and being a news person, but to be able to go out and do it right and feel good about it and enjoy what you're doing. And broadcasting provides that opportunity.
Well, Gene, I'm just one of the many, many people that you've mentored and helped along the way, given an opportunity. Like I said, I think it's ironic that we're doing this interview right after I just fully retired as a sports broadcaster, which was the job you gave me back in the early 70s. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your membership in the Montana Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
This programming series is brought to you by the Greater Montana Foundation, benefiting the people of Montana through communication of issues, trends, and values of importance for present and future generations of Montanans. And by the Montana Historical Society, Big Sky, Big Land, Big History. And with the help of Cordillera Communications, with stations in Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, and Helena. Cordillera Communications, the Montana Television Network.